I am Erica Kane, 38 years old, a lieutenant colonel in U.S. Army Logistics. But in the eyes of the man who shares my DNA, I am nothing more than a disposable pawn. At exactly 9 o'clock this morning, inside the Cuyahoga County Courthouse, my own father pointed a finger in my face in front of a dozen flashing camera strobes and screamed, "Who do you think you are? You are just a grunt who knows how to take orders. I built this empire, and you are just the daughter who ran away to chase boys." Standing right next to him was my brother Mark. He smirked, hands buried in his pockets, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "Go back to the barracks and wash dishes, Erica. Don't dream of touching the inheritance." They are suing to strip me of my rights, claiming I am mentally incompetent because I've been absent serving my country for too long. They think my silence is fear. They have no idea that 8 years ago, on her deathbed, my mother handed me a secret weapon. A legal nuclear option that can turn them into employees in their own company. Comment discipline below and subscribe to the channel if you believe that arrogance always comes before the fall. The smell of old, polished oak and the cloying scent of expensive cologne from a dozen lawyers mixed together to create a suffocating atmosphere inside the Cuyahoga County Courthouse. It smelled like money and lies. I sat alone on the defendant's side. My spine was straight, rigid as a steel rod, my hands resting on my thighs according to regulations. I didn't fidget. I didn't slouch. Across the aisle, my father, Mr. Carter, was laughing with a gaggle of local reporters as if this were a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new luxury condo project, not a court hearing to destroy his daughter. He was wearing a navy blue Armani suit, the shade he always called the color of winners. In this decaying Rust Belt city, where factories were closing and people were struggling to buy groceries, his display of wealth was loud and vulgar. I looked down at my civilian high heels, cheap department store pumps that pinched my toes. My feet missed the weight and protection of my desert combat boots. There were no bullets flying in this room, no IEDs hidden in the trash cans, but I knew the words about to be fired from that man's mouth would carry more kinetic energy than any shrapnel I'd faced downrange. General James Mattis once said, "Be polite, be professional, but have a plan to kill everybody you meet." I repeated that mantra in my head. I wasn't here to kill them physically, but I had a plan to kill their egos legally. The judge entered. We rose. We sat. My father's lawyer, a man with greased back hair and a smile like a shark sensing blood in the water, began his opening statement. He didn't talk about the law. He attacked my character. "Your Honor," he said, his voice slick and oily, pacing back and forth. "Ms. Erica Kane here abandoned her family during their most difficult financial crisis to hide in the Army. While her father and brother fought to keep the family business afloat during the recession, what was she doing? Playing toy soldier overseas, and now she returns, demanding management rights." He walked back to his table and picked up a manila folder. I recognized the seal on the front, my medical records. Furthermore, he waved the file in the air like a trophy. "We have evidence that Ms. Kane has been treated for mild PTSD. How can we possibly entrust multi-million-dollar assets to someone with unstable psychology? Someone who is clearly damaged goods?" My jaw tightened. Damaged goods, that's what they called my service. That's what they called the nights I spent organizing supply lines under fire to ensure soldiers had food and ammo. Then, it was my father's turn. He took the stand. He adjusted his silk tie and looked at the jury, avoiding my eyes completely. He was a master of the performance. "I love my daughter," he said, his voice trembling with a practiced fake sorrow. "But she isn't normal. The military? It changed her. It turned her into someone else. She's cold. She's unfeeling. Just last week, she refused to co-sign a loan for her brother Mark to buy a house. His own sister. Would a normal, loving sibling do that?" I bit the inside of my lip so hard I tasted the metallic tang of blood. "Don't react," I told myself. "Never complain, never explain." He didn't tell the court that the house Mark wanted wasn't a starter home for a family. It was a third villa in Florida that Mark wanted to buy to impress his latest mistress. He didn't mention that the company was currently 2 weeks late on payroll for the warehouse workers because Mark had drained the operating account for a trip to Vegas. My father took my integrity, my refusal to let them bleed the company dry, and twisted it into cruelty. She's mentally unfit, Your Honor, my father concluded, wiping a dry eye. I'm doing this to protect her. She belongs in a facility, or back on a base, not in a boardroom. The gallery murmured in sympathy. Poor Mr. Carter. Such a successful man, burdened with a broken, heartless daughter. I looked over at the plaintiff's table. Mark was sitting there, slouching in his chair. He caught my eye. He wasn't looking at me with pity. He was looking at me with triumph. Then, I saw it. His hand came up to stroke his tie. It was a deep, burgundy silk tie with a subtle diamond pattern. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a vice. I knew that tie. 18 years ago, I was a private first class, making pennies. I had saved my entire first month's paycheck, eating nothing but chow hall food, skipping every weekend outing, to buy that tie. I had mailed it home from Fort Benning for Mark's high school graduation. I'd included a handwritten note. Happy graduation, Mark. I'm so proud of you. Wear this when you conquer the world. He had never written back. He had never thanked me. I assumed he had thrown it away. But here he was, wearing the symbol of my naive, sisterly love, while sitting in a courtroom trying to destroy me. He was using my gift to look respectable while he stole my future. Mark saw me staring at the tie. He grinned, a slow, ugly thing. He leaned over toward me, just slightly, and mouthed the words clearly, so only I could see. Go back to the barracks, you bitch. In that moment, the pain vanished. The heartbreak evaporated. The heat of the courtroom disappeared. I wasn't looking at a 40-year-old businessman anymore. I was looking back through the tunnel of time. The courtroom dissolved, and suddenly, I was 16 years old again, standing in the living room of our old house in Ohio, invisible and alone, watching my brother open presents piled as high as a mountain. The summer of 2002 in Ohio was oppressive. It was the kind of humid, sticky heat that made your shirt cling to your back the moment you stepped outside, accompanied by the constant, deafening buzz of cicadas in the trees. That July was significant for two reasons. It was the month my brother Mark turned 18 and the month I turned 16. We shared the same birthday, a biological coincidence that my father always treated as a divine sign that Mark was the main event and I was just the opening act. On the morning of our birthday, the air was thick enough to chew. Mark had just received his final senior report card. It was a disaster. 2 F's and a D in remedial math. He wasn't graduating on time. He'd have to attend summer school just to get his diploma. But when we walked out to the driveway, none of that mattered. Parked right there on the concrete was a brand new Ford Mustang GT. It was cherry red, gleaming under the morning sun, with a V8 engine that promised raw power and an oversized white bow tied to the roof. It was the kind of car every teenage boy in America dreamed of, the ultimate symbol of freedom and status. My father was standing next to it, beaming like he'd just won the lottery. He slapped the hood. "This is your war horse, son," he boomed, laughing loudly. "A Carter man needs to drive something with a little muscle if he wants to pick up girls, right?" Mark didn't even look at his report card. He threw it in the trash can by the garage door and ran to the driver's side. He hopped in, turned the key, and revved the engine. The roar was deafening. He backed it up aggressively, the tires screeching, and thick gray exhaust smoke blew directly into my face, making me cough. I stood there, waving the smoke away, clutching a piece of paper in my hand. It was my report card. Straight A's. Not a single A-. I was ranked top 5 in my class. I stood by the kitchen window, watching them admire the car. I waited. A naive, foolish part of me thought maybe he has something for me too. And he did. My father walked back toward the house, stepping over the threshold. He didn't look me in the eye. He just tossed a cardboard box toward me. It wasn't wrapped. I caught it against my chest. It felt light. "Mark is going to be busy driving," my father said, wiping a smudge of dirt off his hand. "You help him keep that interior clean, Erica. A girl needs to learn how to take care of a man's property. It's good practice for when you get married. I opened the box. Inside was a bottle of Armor All spray, a yellow sponge, and a can of car wax. A detailing kit. My brother got a $30,000 muscle car for failing high school. I got a bucket and a sponge for getting straight A's. My mother was standing at the kitchen sink, peeling potatoes. She stopped for a second. I saw her shoulders shake. She turned her head away, staring out at the bird feeder in the backyard so she wouldn't have to look at the humiliation on my face. In the Carter household, silence was her primary language. That evening, we had a celebratory dinner. My father insisted on steaks. Huge T-bones grilled rare, just the way Mark liked them. The conversation revolved entirely around the Mustang. Mark couldn't stop talking. "I'm gonna put a Flowmaster exhaust on it," he said with a mouthful of potatoes. "And I'm picking up Stacy tonight. She's the captain of the cheer squad, you know. She's gonna freak when she sees the GT." My birthday was completely forgotten. The only acknowledgement was a tiny, sad birthday candle my mother had secretly stuck into the side of Mark's chocolate cake when my father wasn't looking. She gave me a quick, fleeting smile that vanished as soon as my father cleared his throat. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to say something. I had to prove I existed. "Dad," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "I got a letter today, too. I got a partial scholarship offer from State University for their pre-business program." The clinking of silverware stopped. My father slowly put down his fork. He looked at me with genuine irritation, as if I had just interrupted a sermon. "Scholarship?" he sneered. "Why are you bothering with all that book smarts nonsense? Look at your brother. He has natural leadership potential. He doesn't need to be a bookworm." He took a sip of his wine and pointed a steak knife at me. "Listen to me, Erica. The best thing for you is to take some accounting classes at the community college. Learn to keep the books. That way, when Mark takes over the company, you can be his assistant. You can handle the paperwork while he handles the big decisions." The piece of steak in my mouth turned to ash. I couldn't swallow. I wasn't a daughter to him. I was future support staff for his golden boy. I was being bred to be a servant in my own family. If you have ever sat at a dinner table surrounded by family but felt completely invisible, or if you've ever been told your best isn't good enough just because of who you are, please hit the like button and comment "I see you" below. Let me know I'm not the only one who had to fight for my own existence. That night, I didn't cry. Crying implies you still have hope that someone will comfort you. I had no such illusions left. At 2 a.m., while the house was asleep and the new Mustang sat in the driveway like a sleeping beast, I went to the garage. I didn't touch Mark's car. Instead, I dragged my old bicycle out from behind the lawnmower. The chain was rusty and the seat was torn, but it worked. I packed a small backpack with water, my birth certificate, and my straight A report card. I pedaled. I rode 10 miles through the pitch-black Ohio night. My legs burned and the humid air filled my lungs, but I didn't stop. I rode past the cornfields, past the sleeping suburbs, all the way to the strip mall in the center of town. The Armed Forces recruiting station was closed, of course, but I didn't care. I sat on the concrete curb outside the glass door, hugging my knees to my chest. I stared at a poster taped to the window. It showed a female soldier in full gear, looking strong, capable, and fierce. Below her were the words, "Be all you can be." It was just a slogan to most people. But to me, sitting there in the dark with nothing but a rusty bike and a broken heart, it was a lifeline. I waited there for 4 hours until the sun came up. When the recruiter, a tall sergeant with a coffee cup in his hand, unlocked the door at 8 a.m., he looked surprised to see a teenage girl sitting on the pavement. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked. I stood up. My legs were stiff, but my voice didn't shake. "I want to sign up," I said. "I want to go somewhere where it doesn't matter what my last name is." I didn't sign those papers looking for glory. I wasn't looking for a medal. I was looking for the one thing my father's money couldn't buy and my brother's Mustang couldn't catch. I was looking for respect. Fallujah, 2005. If you've never been there, you can't imagine the sand. It wasn't like the sand at the beach in Florida. It was different. It was fine as baby powder and sharp as crushed glass. It worked its way into everything, your rifle bolt, your eyelashes, the creases of your skin, and even the food you tried to eat. I was a second lieutenant then, 20 years old and responsible for leading supply convoys through what we called the Death Corridor. Every single day was a game of Russian roulette played with a 40-ton truck. On a Tuesday afternoon, the heat was hovering around 110 degrees inside the cab of my vehicle. We were transporting ammunition and medical supplies to a forward outpost. I was scanning the side of the road, looking for anything out of place. A pile of trash, a dead animal, fresh dirt. Then, the world turned white. Boom! An IED exploded 50 meters off our front bumper. The force of the blast was like a giant, invisible hand slapping the earth. It lifted the lead Humvee into the air and slammed it down on its side. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out all other sound. The air instantly filled with thick, black smoke and the acrid chemical smell of burning rubber and searing metal. "Contact! Contact front!" I screamed into the radio, my training taking over before my brain could even process the fear. I jumped out of my truck, rifle raised, running toward the flipped Humvee while shouting orders to the medics. As I dragged a dazed private out of the wreckage, coughing from the smoke, a strange realization hit me. I was alive. For the first time in my life, I felt completely, terrifyingly alive. Here, in this hellscape, my existence mattered. My decisions kept people breathing. I wasn't Mark's assistant. I wasn't a disappointment. I was Lieutenant Kane, and 20 soldiers were looking to me to get them home. We survived the ambush. We patched up the wounded, secured the perimeter, and limped back to the forward operating base, or FOB, just as the sun was setting. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. But the day wasn't over. It was time for mail call. For a deployed soldier, mail call is a sacred ritual. It's the only tether to the world you left behind. I stood in the dusty tent, wiping grease and sweat from my forehead, watching my platoon. Big, tough men were tearing up over photos of their newborns. Others were cheering as they opened boxes of homemade chocolate chip cookies sent by their wives. "Lieutenant Kane!" the mail clerk shouted, tossing a thick, heavy envelope toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was from Ohio. A foolish, childish hope sparked in my chest. Maybe they saw the news about the Fallujah offensive. Maybe Mom is worried. Maybe Mark finally grew up and sent a card. I sat on a crate of ammo, my hands still filthy with the grime of the convoy, and tore open the pristine white envelope. There was no letter. There were no cookies. There wasn't even a card. Instead, a stack of papers slid out. I picked up the first one. It was a credit card statement. Mark Carter. The balance due was circled in aggressive red marker. $15,000. I scanned the charges. VIP bottle service at a club in Cleveland, a designer suit, a weekend stay at a luxury resort. I looked at the next piece of paper. It was a note from my father, written in his jagged, impatient handwriting. "Erica," it read, "the real estate market is slowing down. Business is tight. Your brother needs to maintain an image to close deals with investors, so he spent a little over budget. Since you are over there eating on Uncle Sam's dime and sleeping in a barracks, you don't have any expenses. You don't need your pay. Wire your salary to this account number immediately to cover this bill. Don't make me call your commanding officer and tell him you're an ungrateful daughter who abandons her family in a crisis." I read it twice. Not a single question asking, "Are you safe?" Not a, "We love you." Not a, "Thank you for your service." Just a demand for money to pay for my brother's partying, capped off with a threat to ruin my military career if I didn't comply. I stood up and walked away from the group. I needed air. I walked behind the row of portable latrines, a place where no one would bother me. I took out my Zippo lighter. It was brushed chrome, scratched from the sand. I looked at the bill one last time. $15,000. That was more than half my annual salary at the time. Mark had blown it in a weekend on vodka and girls. Meanwhile, my soldiers were sharing MREs, meals ready to eat, that tasted like cardboard, and sleeping in tents while mortars rained down on us. Something inside me broke. But it wasn't a break that made me weak. It was a break that made me hard. The last tether of guilt snapped. I flicked the wheel of the Zippo. Click. The blue-orange flame danced in the twilight. I held the corner of Mark's credit card bill to the fire. The paper curled and blackened. I watched the charges for champagne and hotels turn into ash. Then I burned my father's letter. I watched his threat about calling my commanding officer crumble into gray flakes that floated away on the desert wind. Bad news from home, Lieutenant. I jumped slightly. It was Master Sergeant Jones, a grizzled veteran with 3 tours under his belt. He was leaning against the wall, smoking a cigarette. He had seen me burning the papers. I looked at the pile of ash on the ground, then looked at the sergeant. He had pulled me out of the line of fire earlier that day. He would take a bullet for me, and I would take one for him. That was family. No, Master Sergeant, I said, my voice ice cold. I snapped the Zippo shut with a loud clack. Just burning some trash. It was cluttering up my gear. He nodded, understanding more than he said. Roger that, ma'am. Keep your head on a swivel. I walked back toward my tent under the vast Iraqi stars. I didn't cry. The desert heat had dried up all my tears. From that moment on, Erica the daughter was dead, buried somewhere in the sand of Fallujah. Only Erica the soldier remained. And she didn't pay ransoms to terrorists, even if they shared her last name. It was 2015. 10 years had passed since the day I burned my father's letter in the Iraqi desert. I was stationed at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, coordinating logistics for NATO exercises, when my phone rang. It was Dr. Evans, my mother's private physician. His voice was grim. She doesn't have much time left, Erica. If you want to say goodbye, you need to get to Cleveland. Now. I caught the first military transport flight back to the States. I didn't sleep for the entire 9-hour flight. The VIP wing of the Cleveland Clinic was quiet, sterile, and smelled sharply of antiseptic and floor wax. It was a cold place to die. I rushed into room 402, still wearing my travel fatigues. My mother lay there, hooked up to a dozen machines. She looked so small. The cancer had eaten away the soft, quiet woman I remembered, leaving only skin stretched tight over fragile bones. But the room was empty. There was no husband holding her hand. There was no son weeping by her side. I looked up at the flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. It was tuned to a local news channel with the volume turned low. On the screen, I saw a ballroom filled with crystal chandeliers and people in tuxedos. And there, center stage, was my father. He was holding a crystal trophy above his head, a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Chamber of Commerce. He was beaming, his face flushed with champagne and ego. Mark was standing next to him, wearing a flashy tuxedo, laughing with a blonde model who looked bored. They were celebrating my father's legacy, while the woman who had actually built that legacy, who had managed the books and saved every penny in the early days, was taking her final breaths alone in a hospital room 5 miles away. The rage I felt was cold and absolute. I turned off the TV. The room fell silent, save for the rhythmic whoosh hiss of the ventilator. Erica? The voice was barely a whisper. I turned. My mother's eyes were open. They were glassy, clouded by morphine, but she was looking right at me. I pulled a chair close and took her hand. It felt like holding a dried leaf. I'm here, Mom. I'm here. Erica, she wheezed, her chest heaving with the effort. I'm sorry. Don't, Mom. You don't have to apologize. Yes, I do, she insisted, her grip tightening with surprising strength. I was too weak. I let him do it. I let your father turn Mark into a monster. And I let him drive you away. I watched you leave on that bicycle, and I didn't stop you. Tears hot and fast spilled down my cheeks, landing on the crisp white hospital sheets. It's okay, Mom. I survived. I'm strong. She shook her head slowly. You are strong, but they are dangerous. Your father, he has the mouth of a motivational speaker, but the mind of a gambler. And Mark is just an empty bucket. He echoes whatever your father says. If I die, they will burn this family's assets to the ground in 5 years. I can't stop them, Mom. I'm just the soldier. They own the company. No, she whispered. They don't. She nodded toward the shadowed corner of the room. I hadn't noticed him before. Mr. Henderson, the family's estate lawyer for 30 years, stepped forward. He looked tired and sad. He placed a thick leather binder on the tray table. The cover read, "The Carter Asset Protection Trust." "What is this?" I asked. My mother looked at me with the most intense, lucid gaze I'd ever seen from her. "Years ago, I started moving things, quietly. Your father never checks the fine print, Erica. He only looks at the bottom line. I transferred all the voting shares, the real power, into this trust." Mr. Henderson opened the binder. "Erica," he said softly, "your mother wants to appoint you as the sole trustee. Your father and Mark will remain on the board. They will keep their titles. They will receive their dividends and salaries so they can maintain their lifestyle. But they cannot sell assets, they cannot take out massive loans, and they cannot liquidate the company without the trustee's signature." He handed me a heavy fountain pen. "You have veto power," my mother whispered. "You are the firewall. Don't let them destroy what my parents built." My hand trembled as I held the pen. This wasn't a gift. It wasn't an inheritance. It was a burden. It was a secret command to babysit two grown men who hated me from across the ocean. "Promise me," she rasped. I looked at her, then at the pen. I signed my name on the dotted line. Erica Kane, trustee. "I promise," I said. "I will hold the line." 2 hours later, the monitors began to wail. The flatline tone pierced the air, a long, singular note of finality. Only then did the door burst open. My father and Mark rushed in, smelling of expensive scotch and cigars. When they saw she was gone, the performance began. Mark threw himself onto the chair I had vacated, wailing loudly, looking around to make sure the nurses were watching his display of grief. My father hugged my mother's lifeless body, sobbing about his beloved partner. But I was watching closely. As he hugged her, I saw his eyes dart to his gold Rolex watch. He was checking the time. He was probably calculating if he could still make it back to the after-party. 3 days later, at the funeral, the performance continued. My father stood at the podium in the church, delivering a eulogy that was 10% about my mother and 90% about how hard it would be for him to go on without her support. He called her his silent anchor. I stood in the very back row, away from the family pew. I was wearing my dress blues, the formal ceremonial uniform of the army. My white gloves were spotless. My medals gleamed under the church lights. I didn't cry. I had shed my tears in the hospital room. When the casket was carried out, I snapped to attention. I raised my gloved hand in a slow, sharp salute. It was the highest honor I could give her. My father glanced at me as he walked behind the coffin. He looked annoyed that I was there, stealing focus with my uniform. He had no idea that the daughter he dismissed as a grunt now held the keys to his entire kingdom. The grieving daughter was gone. The trustee had taken her post, and my watch had just begun. For the next 6 years, I lived 2 completely separate lives. By day, I was Major Erica Kane, a logistics officer stationed at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. My world was loud, gritty, and high stakes. I was responsible for coordinating the movement of M1 Abrams tanks and heavy artillery across Europe for Operation Atlantic Resolve. If I made a mistake, convoys stalled, allies got nervous, and generals screamed. But by night, when the base went quiet and my fellow officers were asleep, I became someone else. I would sit in my cramped quarters, brew a pot of black coffee thick enough to float a horseshoe, and open my encrypted laptop. I wasn't Major Kane anymore. I was simply the trustee. I was the ghost haunting my father's company. Through a secure server set up by Mr. Henderson, I reviewed every single financial document from the headquarters in Ohio. What I saw in those early days was a crime scene of incompetence. The spreadsheets were bleeding red ink. My father was treating the business like a country club. I found lease agreements for prime warehouse space signed for pennies on the dollar, given as favors to his Sunday golf buddies. Mark was even worse. He was using the corporate credit card like a personal piggy bank. I scrolled through pages of expenses categorized as client entertainment. It was thousands of dollars spent at steakhouses, nightclubs, and VIP lounges in Las Vegas. I cracked my knuckles and went to work. I couldn't show my face, so I used the iron fist of the trust. I sent a formal directive to Mr. Henderson: fire the chief financial officer. The man was my father's drinking buddy from college, a guy who hadn't looked at a tax code since 1995. My father raged. He sent furious emails to Mr. Henderson demanding to know why the trust was interfering, but he couldn't do anything. The trust owned the voting shares. I ordered the hiring of a ruthless independent CPA firm from Chicago to audit the books. The bleeding stopped. Then came the showdown over the jet. In 2018, Mark submitted a proposal to purchase a light private jet, a used Citation. His justification was that he needed it to visit regional storage sites more efficiently. I checked the flight logs of the charter planes he had been using. 90% of his trips were to Miami on weekends. I pulled up the purchase order on my screen. The cursor hovered over the approval box. I selected the red stamp tool. Denied, non-essential expenditure. Click. The next day, Mr. Henderson emailed me. Mark threw a chair through the glass wall of the conference room, he wrote. He's screaming about the dead hand of the trust ruining his life. I sipped my coffee in my cold German office, 4,000 miles away, and smiled. Mark didn't know that the person denying his toy was the same sister he told to go wash dishes. Then came 2020. The world stopped. The COVID-19 pandemic hit the global economy like a sledgehammer. The global supply chain collapsed. Ports in Los Angeles and Long Beach were gridlocked. Ships were anchored offshore for weeks. The just-in-time delivery model that the world relied on fell apart. In Ohio, my father panicked. He saw the uncertainty and reverted to his gambler's instinct: fear. He drafted an emergency plan to sell off 3 of our massive distribution centers to a competitor for quick cash. He called it his exit strategy. He wanted liquidity to hide in his mansion until the virus blew over. From my desk in Germany, looking at global logistics reports that civilians didn't have access to, I saw something different. I saw a bottleneck. With stores closed and everyone ordering online, warehouse space was about to become the most valuable real estate on earth. My father sent the sale contracts to the trust for approval. I didn't just deny them. I issued a command: vetoed. New directive: halt all sales, retain all square footage, triple the lease. Renewal rates effective immediately. My father called Mr. Henderson screaming that the faceless bureaucrats at the trust were going to bankrupt the family. He told everyone we were doomed. He was wrong. 3 months later, the demand for storage skyrocketed. Amazon, FedEx, Walmart. They were desperate for space. Our warehouses, which my father wanted to dump, were suddenly gold mines. We tripled the rent, and clients were thanking us for taking their money. The company's net profit jumped 400% in a single quarter. We made more money in 2020 than in the previous 10 years combined, and that's when the stolen valor began. I opened my iPad one morning to read the Cleveland Business Journal. There was my father on the cover, arms crossed, looking wise and visionary. The headline read, "The Oracle of Ohio. How CEO Carter's strategic vision saved his empire." In the interview, he bragged about his steely nerves and his foresight to hold onto assets when everyone else was selling. "You have to know when to hold 'em," he quoted, taking credit for the decision I had forced down his throat. I laughed, a short, dry sound. I turned off the screen, put on my cap, and walked out to inspect a line of trucks. I didn't need the credit. I needed the mission accomplished. But the silence was broken a week later. My phone rang, an unknown number from the US. "Hello." "Hey, Erica." It was Mark. I hadn't heard his voice in 2 years. "Dad told me you're still playing soldier over there in Germany, still saluting and marching." "I'm serving, Mark. What do you want?" Nothing, he laughed, the sound of ice clinking in a glass in the background. "I just wanted to check on the little sister. You know, things are crazy good here. We are printing money. literally printing it. Dad and I are crushing it. He paused, waiting for me to praise him. When I didn't, he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. Listen, I know government pay sucks. If you need a little help, just ask. I can wire you a few grand. Buy yourself some decent shoes or something. I'm counting money until my hands cramp over here. My grip tightened on the phone. He was offering me crumbs from the feast I had prepared. He genuinely believed his own lie, that he and Dad were business geniuses, and I was just the poor, unfortunate sister stuck in a uniform. I'm fine, Mark, I said, my voice steady. Keep your money. You might need it. Suit yourself, he scoffed. Don't say I never tried to help. He hung up. Their ignorance was my shield. It allowed me to operate without them fighting me at every turn. But it was also a profound insult. They were feasting on the harvest of my labor while spitting on my name. But I knew something they didn't. Success built on a lie is fragile. And Mark was getting bored with stability. I could feel it. The crash wasn't a matter of if, but when. The collapse of my family didn't start with a bang. It started with a kid in a hoodie. It was early 2022. The world was going crazy for digital gold, and my brother Mark, always chasing the easiest dollar, brought home a 25-year-old investment genius named Jaden. Jaden looked like every other tech grifter I'd seen on the news. He wore expensive sneakers, oversized hoodies, and spoke in a language that sounded like gibberish to a sane person. He sat in my father's mahogany-paneled office and threw around buzzwords like blockchain, decentralized finance, Web3, and the metaverse. Through the security cameras I'd installed in the boardroom, ostensibly for insurance purposes, I watched the pitch from my laptop in Germany. Mr. Carter, Jaden said, spinning a digital rendering on an iPad. Physical storage is dead. The future is the metaverse. We want to turn Carter Logistics into the first fully decentralized shipping empire on the blockchain. But to get in on the ground floor, we need liquidity. Fast! His proposal? Sell Warehouse 1. My heart stopped. Warehouse 1 wasn't just a building. It was the original brick facility my grandfather built with his own hands in 1955. It was the beating heart of the company, the asset my mother had fought hardest to keep during the lean years. It was prime real estate worth $20 million. And they wanted to sell it to buy what? Pictures of monkeys, digital tokens, air. I watched my father. A smart man would have kicked this kid out. But my father was terrified of being seen as an irrelevant boomer. He wanted to be cool. He wanted to be rich without working. 20 million, my father asked, his eyes gleaming with greed. And we triple it in 6 months, Jaden promised. It's a guaranteed moonshot. My father nodded. Let's do it. Draw up the papers. I slammed my laptop shut. Alarm bells were ringing in my head so loud they drowned out the German rain outside. I spent the next 4 hours doing what I do best, reconnaissance. I dug into Jaden's background. It didn't take long. The guy was a ghost. He had 2 previous aliases. He had been flagged by the SEC for a rug pull scheme in 2021, where he raised $5 million for a crypto project and then vanished, leaving investors with worthless tokens. He was a con artist, and my father and brother were about to hand him the family legacy on a silver platter. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. Hey sis, just wanted to let you know, Dad and I are making a massive play. We're gonna be billionaires. When the deal closes on Monday, I might even buy you a condo so you can stop living like a grunt. You're welcome. The arrogance was suffocating. He was bragging about burning down our house to buy magic beans. It was Friday night. They were signing the sale of Warehouse 1 on Monday morning. If that sale went through, the money would be transferred to a digital wallet in the Bahamas before noon, and Jaden would vanish. The Carter legacy would be reduced to zeros and ones. I had no choice. I called Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice shaking with rage. Activate Clause 4. Freeze the assets. I am exercising my veto power. Erica, the old lawyer warned, if you do this, they will know, the gloves will come off. Let them come, I said. Kill the deal. Monday morning arrived. I watched the feed. My father and Mark were sitting in the conference room with Jaden. There was a bottle of Dom Perignon on ice. They were laughing, pens in hand, ready to sign the deed to Warehouse 1. The door opened. Mr. Henderson walked in. He didn't look happy. He walked straight to the table and threw a single document onto the polished wood. "The sale is canceled," Henderson said flatly. My father looked up, confused. "What? Who says?" "The trustee," Henderson replied. "Under the terms of the Carter Asset Protection Trust, the sale of any core real estate requires unanimous consent. The trustee has formally denied this transaction. The assets are frozen." My father's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "Who? Who dares to stop me? I am the CEO." "You are the CEO," Henderson corrected. "But you don't own the building, sir. The trust does." Mark stood up. He looked at the document, then at Jaden, who was already nervously packing his iPad. Mark realized his billions were evaporating. He grabbed the bottle of champagne, not to drink, but as a weapon. He hurled it against the wall. Smash! Red wine exploded across the white wallpaper like a gunshot wound. "It's her!" Mark screamed, veins bulging in his neck. "It's that bitch, Erica. She's doing this. She's jealous because we cut her out of the deal. She wants us to fail." My father sat there, stunned. The humiliation of being overruled in front of a business partner broke something inside him. His narcissism couldn't handle the injury. He didn't see a daughter saving him from a scam. He saw a subordinate challenging his authority. He looked at Mark, then at the lawyer. His eyes went cold. Dangerous. "She thinks she can control me?" My father hissed, his voice low and venomous. "She thinks her mother's will is stronger than me?" He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. "Get our lawyers on the phone, not the corporate ones. The sharks," my father commanded. "If she wants to hide behind a legal document, we will burn the document." "How?" Mark asked, panting. "She has a medical record, doesn't she?" My father smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "She's a veteran. She saw combat. We will prove she is mentally unstable. We will prove she has PTSD. We will petition the court to declare her incompetent and strip her of the trusteeship." "We're going to sue her?" Mark asked. "No," my father said. "We're going to destroy her." If you agree that selling a family legacy to buy fake internet money is absolute insanity, and you support Erica stopping it, please hit that like button and comment, "Hold the line" below. Let's show them they can't gaslight us. 2 days later, a process server knocked on my door in Germany. He handed me a thick envelope. It wasn't a letter from home. It was a court summons. Plaintiff: Arthur and Mark Carter. Defendant: Erica Kane. Cause of action: removal of trustee due to mental incapacity. They weren't just coming for the money anymore. To get their way, they were willing to stand in front of a judge and tell the world that my service to my country had made me crazy. They were going to weaponize my trauma to rob me. I looked at the papers. I didn't feel fear. I felt the icy calm of a soldier entering the kill zone. "Okay, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "You want a war? You just declared one on the wrong soldier." I touched down at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport just before midnight. I didn't call for a town car. Instead, I rented a nondescript beige sedan, the kind of car that disappears in a parking lot, and drove straight to a Motel 6 off the interstate. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and lemon pledge, and the neon sign outside flickered with a buzzing sound that would drive most people crazy. But to me, it was perfect. It was anonymous. It was safe. My father's mansion had gold-plated faucets, but it was filled with enemies. This cheap motel room was my command center. I threw my duffel bag on the bed and spread out my war map. Printouts of the fraudulent financial reports, the fake medical records they plan to use to paint me as unstable, and a list of potential witnesses. In the military, we use a strategy called the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. If you can cycle through these steps faster than your enemy, you win. Observe. My father and Mark were arrogant. They believed their own lie, that I was a broken, emotional woman. Orient. They expected me to play defense. They expected me to cry on the stand and plead for mercy. Decide I wouldn't defend, I would attack, I would hit them in the one place they couldn't protect. The money trail. Act. It was time to find the bodies they had buried. The next morning, at 0700 hours, I sat in a booth at a Greasy Spoon diner on the outskirts of town. I ordered black coffee and waited. 10 minutes later, a gray-haired woman in a sensible raincoat walked in. It was Mrs. Higgins. She had been the head bookkeeper for Carter Logistics for 30 years. My mother trusted her with her life. Last month, Mark had fired her because she was too old and didn't get the crypto vision. She sat down opposite me, her hands trembling as she held her coffee cup. She looked terrified. "Erica," she whispered, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "They are killing it. They are killing your mother's company." "I know, Mrs. Higgins. That's why I'm here, but I need proof. The records they sent to the trust are sanitized. I need the real numbers." Tears welled up in her eyes. "It's not just the bad investments, honey. It's worse. Mark. He needed cash to cover his losses on that crypto exchange. When the banks wouldn't lend to him, he dipped into the employee pension fund." My blood ran cold. "He stole from the retirement accounts. He called it a short-term loan," she spat out the words. "But he hasn't paid it back. There are drivers who have been with us for 20 years whose 401ks are empty, Erica. If the company goes under, they lose everything. Stealing from a company is one thing. Stealing the life savings of blue-collar workers, men and women who broke their backs for us, was a crime that crossed every line of morality I possessed." Mrs. Higgins reached into her purse and slid a small silver USB drive across the table. "I backed up the real ledger before they escorted me out by security," she said. "Every transaction, every fake receipt, every stolen dollar, it's all there." I closed my hand over the USB drive. It felt cold and hard. This wasn't just evidence. This was a death sentence for their careers. "Thank you, Mrs. Higgins," I said. "Go home, lock your doors, watch the news tomorrow." I left the diner with the smoking gun in my pocket. But to make sure the kill shot landed, I needed them to be distracted. I needed them fat, happy, and careless. I pulled out my burner phone and called Mr. Henderson. "Unlock the credit cards," I ordered. "Just for 48 hours. Lift the spending limits." "Erica, are you insane?" Henderson asked. "They will burn through thousands." "I know," I said. "Let them. I want a record of exactly what they do when they think they've won." The trap was set. By that afternoon, my phone, which was linked to the corporate account alerts, started buzzing. Ding, ding, ding. Notification. Armani store, $5,200. Notification. Ritz-Carlton Spa, $800. Notification. Morton's The Steakhouse, reservation deposit. They took the bait. They thought the sudden unlocking of the cards meant I had given up or that the trust was too scared to stop them before the trial. That evening, I drove my rental car to the parking lot across the street from Morton's. I sat in the dark, eating a $2 gas station sandwich wrapped in plastic. Through the large glass windows of the restaurant, I saw them. My father was holding court at the best table in the house, raising a glass of expensive red wine. Mark was laughing, wearing his new suit, slapping the back of a waiter. They looked like kings. They were feasting on the stolen retirement money of their own employees. I took a bite of my stale sandwich and smiled. "Eat up, boys," I thought. "Enjoy the Last Supper. Because tomorrow, the bill comes due." I drove back to the Motel 6. It was the night before the trial. At 10:01 p.m., an email pinged on my laptop. It was from their lawyer. A settlement offer. "Ms. Kane," it read, "if you agree to sign a statement admitting to mental incompetence due to service-related trauma and resign as trustee, the family is willing to provide a compassionate stipend of $1,000 per month for your care. $1,000. To shut up and let them rob the workers blind." They genuinely thought I was a wounded animal looking for a handout. They had no idea they were poking a tiger. I didn't reply. I didn't even type, "Go to hell." Silence is louder. I turned off my laptop. I went to the closet and pulled out the garment bag I'd carried with me from Germany. I set up the wobbly motel ironing board. I filled the iron with water. For the next hour, the only sound in the room was the hiss of steam. I pressed my dress blues. I sharpened the creases on the trousers until they could cut glass. I polished the brass buttons until they shone like gold. I laid out my white gloves. I wasn't wearing this uniform to show off. I was wearing it to remind the judge and my father of exactly who I was. I wasn't the crazy daughter. I wasn't the runaway. I was an officer of the United States Army. I had sworn an oath to defend against enemies, foreign and domestic. And tomorrow morning, at 900 hours, I was going to take down 2 domestic enemies in room 304. War was coming. And I was dressed for battle. The bailiff's voice boomed through the courtroom, cutting through the murmurs of the reporters and the nervous shuffling of papers. All rise. The side door opened and Judge Miller walked in. He was a mountain of a man, tall, black, with hair the color of brushed steel. He moved with a heavy, deliberate grace that commanded silence. On the corner of his bench, facing out, was a small, framed, black and white photograph. Even from where I sat, I recognized the uniform. United States Marine Corps, Vietnam, Quezon. He wasn't just a judge, he was a brother in arms. He knew what service meant. He sat down and surveyed the room over the rim of his reading glasses. He looked at my father, who was sitting with his legs crossed at the ankle, looking bored and superior. Then, the judge looked at me. I was sitting at attention in my dress blues, white gloves folded on the table, staring straight ahead. Judge Miller gave me a barely perceptible nod. Then he slammed his gavel down. Bang. I have reviewed the filings, Judge Miller said, his voice deep and gravelly. The plaintiffs allege that Ms. Erica Kane is mentally incompetent due to PTSD and should be removed as trustee of the Carter estate. He turned his gaze to my father. Mr. Carter, please take the stand. My father buttoned his Armani jacket and walked up, smiling at the jury as if he were accepting an award. Mr. Carter, the judge asked, leaning forward, you claim you are the sole architect of Carter Logistics' success over the last decade. Is that correct? Absolutely, Your Honor, my father beamed. I built this ship. I steer it. I see. The judge flipped a page in the file. So, you were the one who authorized the emergency financial restructuring during the COVID-19 crisis in 2020, the decision that saved your company from bankruptcy? My father hesitated for a split second. Well, yes. Technically, my chief financial officer handled the paperwork. But the vision was mine. Judge Miller shook his head slowly. Wrong. Excuse me? My father blinked. That is incorrect, sir. The judge picked up a document from his desk and held it up. This is Exhibit C. It is the original charter of the Carter Asset Protection Trust, signed by your late wife. The room went deadly silent. Mr. Carter, the judge continued, his voice ringing out, for the last 8 years, every single expenditure over $10,000, every lease agreement, and every strategic pivot has required a signature of authorization, and that signature is not yours. The judge pointed a finger at me. Every fax came from Ramstein Air Base, or a forward operating base in Afghanistan, or a logistics hub in Poland. While Ms. Kane was serving her country, she was also running your company. You think you are the CEO, Mr. Carter? No, you are a hired manager. The daughter you call mentally unstable has been babysitting you from a war zone for nearly a decade. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. The reporters in the back row started typing furiously on their laptops. My father's face drained of all color. He went from a confident red to a ghostly sheet white. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The illusion of his power had just been shattered in public. Objection! Mark screamed, jumping up from the plaintiff's table. That's a lie! She faked those documents. She's just a grunt. She doesn't know anything about business. Sit down, Mr. Carter, the judge roared, or I will hold you in contempt. No! Mark shouted, his face twisted in panic. She's ruining us. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor. The sound was sharp and loud. I walked slowly to the witness stand, my heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. I didn't look at the judge, I looked at Mark. I reached into my uniform pocket and pulled out the silver USB drive Mrs. Higgins had given me. I placed it gently on the railing in front of the judge. Your Honor, I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone. The plaintiffs claim I blocked the sale of the warehouse because I am irrational. That is false. I pointed at the USB drive. This drive contains the forensic accounting ledger of Carter Logistics. It proves that my brother, Mark Carter, has embezzled $450,000 from the employee pension fund over the last 18 months. Liar! Mark shrieked, but his voice cracked. He stole from the 401ks of truck drivers and warehouse workers to cover his losses in a cryptocurrency scam and to pay off gambling debts. I continued, relentless. I blocked the sale of Warehouse 1 last week because I intercepted a wire transfer request. Mark intended to funnel $20 million of the sale proceeds into an offshore digital wallet in the Bahamas before vanishing. I turned my whole body to face Mark. He was trembling now, holding onto the table for support. You aren't a victim, Mark, I said, cold as ice. You are a parasite. You feed on the people who actually do the work. And today, I am the dewormer. Enough, Judge Miller said. He sounded tired, but angry. He raised his gavel again. It hung in the air for a second before coming down with the finality of a guillotine blade. Crack. The court dismisses all charges against Ms. Kane with prejudice, the judge declared. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented in Exhibit C and the witness testimony regarding embezzlement, I am referring this matter immediately to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation. He looked at the two bailiffs standing by the door. Officers, please take Mr. Mark Carter into custody. He is a flight risk. What? No, Dad, do something, Mark yelled as the officers grabbed his arms. The metallic click-click of handcuffs echoed off the high ceiling. My father didn't move. He slumped forward, his chest heaving, his head resting on his arms on the table. He turned his head sideways to look at me. The arrogance was gone. The narcissism was fractured. For the first time in 38 years, he wasn't looking at me with contempt or dismissal. He was looking at me with pure, unadulterated fear. He realized in that moment that he hadn't just lost the lawsuit. He had lost his heir. He had lost his reputation. And he had lost his kingdom to the one person he had spent a lifetime underestimating. The grunt had won. The chaos of the courtroom faded into a hollow silence. The reporters had rushed out to file their stories about the Carter Empire scandal. The jury was gone. I stood in the long marble corridor of the Cuyahoga County Courthouse. It was empty, except for two figures. Down the hall, two bailiffs were escorting Mark toward the holding cells. His hands were cuffed behind his back, his expensive suit rumpled. Before he disappeared around the corner, he twisted his head back. He didn't look sorry. He looked venomous. You heartless bitch! He screamed, his voice echoing off the stone walls. You did this! You're evil! I didn't blink. I just watched him go. He was a 40-year-old man blaming his little sister for his own crimes. He would have plenty of time to think about that in a federal cell. Then, there was my father. He was standing 10 feet away from me, leaning against a pillar as if his legs couldn't hold his weight. In the span of 1 hour, he had aged 20 years. The real estate tycoon was gone. The Oracle of Ohio had vanished. All that was left was a trembling, defeated old man facing bankruptcy and public shame. He straightened his jacket with a shaky hand and walked toward me. He reached out, his fingers twitching, aiming for my shoulder. A gesture of familiarity, a gesture of ownership. Instinctively, I took a step back. My heel clicked sharply on the floor. That single step back was the most powerful movement of my life. It was a physical wall. The distance between us was only 3 feet, but emotionally, it was wider than the Atlantic Ocean I had crossed to get here. His hand dropped to his side. Erica, he rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves. You won. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted? To see your brother in handcuffs and your father humiliated before the entire city? I looked into his eyes. I searched them, desperate for even a microscopic speck of genuine remorse. I wanted to see a father who realized he had hurt his child. But I found nothing. I saw only self-pity. I saw a man mourning his reputation, not his family. He wasn't sorry for what he did to me. He was sorry that he had lost. I didn't send Mark to jail, Dad, I said, my voice calm and low. Greed sent him to jail. And I didn't humiliate you. Your arrogance did that. For years, you've been operating in the dark, hiding debts and stealing funds. All I did was turn on the lights. And you're just afraid of what the light reveals. His face crumpled. He began to weep. But these weren't the tears of a parent grieving a broken home. They were the tears of a toddler who had his favorite toy taken away. But I'm ruined, he sobbed, wiping his nose with a silk handkerchief. The club, my friends, they'll all know. I'm alone. Mark is gone. Your mother is gone. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying selfish panic. Who is going to take care of me, Erica? I'm old. I can't manage the house. I can't be alone. There it was. The truth. He didn't want a daughter. He wanted a nurse. He wanted an ATM. He wanted a human shield to protect him from the consequences of his own life. I will make sure you are taken care of, I said. Hope sparked in his eyes. He straightened up slightly, thinking he had hooked me again. Thinking the good daughter was back. But not in the way you want, I continued, crushing that hope instantly. I'm not moving back to Ohio. I'm not giving you access to the accounts. I will set up direct payments to the utility companies so the heat and lights stay on. I will hire a home health aide to cook your meals and make sure you take your medicine. A nurse, he sputtered. But you should be there. No, I said firmly. I will pay the bills, Dad. But I will never eat dinner at your table again. I will not answer your phone calls unless it is a medical emergency confirmed by a doctor. You won't see me at Christmas. You won't see me at Thanksgiving. You can't do that, he whispered. That's cruel. It's not cruel, it's necessary, I replied. You had 38 years to apply for the job of father. You had 1,000 chances to protect me, to value me, or even just to see me. Instead, you chose to be a terrible boss. And as the trustee of this family, I am firing you from my life. I didn't wait for his response. I had said everything that needed to be said. I turned around. Click, click, click. My dress shoes struck the marble with a steady military rhythm. I walked toward the heavy double doors at the end of the hall. Erica, he shouted after me, his voice cracking. You can't leave me here. I am your father. I made you. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I didn't turn my head. I reached the doors and pushed them open. The midday sun of Cleveland hit me like a physical force. It was blindingly bright. The air outside was hot and smelled of asphalt and city traffic, but to me, it was the sweetest perfume on earth. It didn't smell like old wood or lies anymore. It smelled of freedom. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs until they hurt. The weight I had been carrying since I was 16 years old. The weight of being the scapegoat. The weight of needing his approval. The weight of the Carter name slid off my shoulders. I walked down the courthouse steps, alone, but not lonely. The man inside was Mr. Carter. The prisoner in the van was inmate 458. And me? I wasn't the daughter anymore. I wasn't the victim. I was just Erica. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. 6 months after the trial, I drove my rental sedan down the long gravel driveway of Warehouse 1. The last time I'd been here, the entrance was blocked by Mark's flashy sports cars and the SUVs of his sycophant friends. Today, it looked different. It looked like business. A line of 18-wheelers was backed up to the loading docks, their engines idling with a low, steady rumble. Forklifts zipped back and forth like busy beetles, their backup alarms beeping in a rhythmic, productive symphony. Drivers were drinking coffee on the loading ramp, laughing and checking their manifests. I parked and walked inside. The air didn't smell like the expensive, cloying cologne of the courtroom. It smelled of corrugated cardboard, diesel fumes, and hydraulic oil. To most people, it might smell like work. To me, it smelled like honest labor. It was cleaner than any perfume I'd ever smelled in my father's mansion. I walked to the center of the vast floor. The afternoon sun was streaming through the high skylights, illuminating millions of dust motes dancing in the beams of light. It looked almost like a cathedral. I reached out and placed my palm against the rough, cold brick wall. This was the original structure my grandfather laid in 1955. This was the heart my mother had fought to keep beating. I held the line, Mom, I whispered to the empty air. Nobody sold it. It's still standing. And so am I. The company was safe. The parasite had been removed. Mark was currently a resident of the Federal Correctional Institution in Morgantown, West Virginia. It was a minimum security facility, often called Club Fed, but it was still a cage. He was serving a 24-month sentence for embezzlement and tax evasion. He had called me yesterday from the prison payphone. He didn't ask how I was. He spent the 3 minutes complaining that the commissary food was terrible and asked if I could put money in his account so he could buy honey buns and ramen noodles. I already sent you a care package, Mark, I had told him. Really? What is it? Snacks? No, I replied. It's a textbook called Business Ethics 101. I hung up before he could scream. It was petty, perhaps, but it was also the only education he was ever going to get that mattered. And my father? He was still living in the big house on the hill. But without his title, without his power, the mansion had become a mausoleum. I had appointed a new board of directors, and their first act was to strip him of all executive power. To save him from total public embarrassment, we allowed him to keep the title of honorary chairman. It sounded important, but it meant nothing. He had no vote. He had no keys. He had no say. Mrs. Higgins told me he spends his days sitting in his leather armchair, staring at his phone, waiting for it to ring. He waits for the politicians, the golf buddies, the friends who used to drink his scotch to call him for advice. But the phone never rings. He had spent a lifetime using fear to command respect. Now that the fear was gone, he was discovering that he was simply forgettable. That silence was his prison, and it was far colder than the one Mark was in. Ms. Kane? I turned around. A young forklift driver was looking at me. Can I help you, ma'am? This is a restricted area. I smiled. He didn't know who I was. To him, I was just a woman in jeans and a flannel shirt. No, I'm just leaving, I said. Keep up the good work. People had asked me if I would resign my commission in the Army to take over as CEO. They assumed that was the prize I had been fighting for. They thought I wanted the corner office, the leather chair, and the country club membership. They didn't understand me at all. I shook my head and laughed when the lawyers suggested it. I didn't belong in boardrooms filled with recycled air and fake smiles. I belonged in the mud. I belonged with the men and women who put the mission before their ego. I had rehired Mrs. Higgins as a senior consultant to oversee the finances, and we had hired a professional CEO, a woman with 20 years of logistics experience, to run the day-to-day operations. I would remain the trustee, the ghost in the machine. I didn't need to sit on the throne to rule the kingdom. I just needed to hold the keys to the armory to make sure no one burned the castle down again. I walked back to the heavy steel door of the warehouse. I pulled it shut. The latch clicked into place with a solid metallic sound. Clack. I paused and looked at my reflection in the glass of the door. I saw a 39-year-old woman. There were a few gray hairs at my temples that hadn't been there a year ago. There were fine lines around my eyes from squinting into the sun. Both the desert sun of Iraq and the harsh light of truth in Ohio. But the eyes looking back at me were clear. They were steady. I wasn't the Carter daughter anymore. I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the scapegoat. I walked to my rental car and threw my duffel bag in the back seat. I climbed in and turned the key. The engine purred to life. Tomorrow, I would be on a plane back to Ramstein. There were convoys to schedule. There were soldiers to feed. There was a job to do. The world out there is full of noise. Arrogant men like my father and brother will always love to shout, to brag, to demand attention. They think noise is power. But I had learned the truth. Real power is like the foundation of this warehouse. It lies deep underground. It doesn't speak. It doesn't ask for applause. It just holds everything up. I put the car in drive and pulled away. leaving the dust and the memories behind me. I drove toward the horizon, into the quiet, beautiful silence of a job well done. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my journey, it is this. Stop waiting for the people who broke you to put you back together. They never will. And that is okay. True power isn't about inheriting a kingdom or forcing your family to finally validate you. It is about realizing that your dignity, your skills, and your inner peace are assets they can never touch. You are not defined by how they treated you at the dinner table. You are defined by the life you build once you walk out that door. You have the power to be your own hero. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to make the hard choice to fire a toxic family member from your life to save your own sanity? Or maybe you are the quiet professional in your family, holding everything together while others take the credit? Please share your story in the comments below. I read them all, and your strength inspires me. If my fight for justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of truth and resilience. Until next time, stay strong and hold the line.